Do you think that any of this is a psyop by the U.S. government?
Entirely possible. I mean, our government and other governments have admitted that they've tried to use UFOs to cover secret projects.
The line was that there was outside pressure to stop the hearing. When those words entered the Congressional record in 2024, there were no names, no agencies, only the acknowledgment that such pressure existed. By September 2025, public transparency appeared to win. Witnesses were posted, the agenda was clean, and the event was scheduled as a televised hearing. But the real custodians of deep space data never took their seats. If hearings are not blocked but merely bounded, then who decides what remains hidden when the subject moves beyond Earth's atmosphere? Quick detour. If you're into this kind of paper trail to powerline analysis, do me a favor. Hit like if you're enjoying it, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell so you get pinged when the next deep dive drops. It's free, it takes a second, and it's the best way to support the channel. And what happens when transparency itself feels engineered? On the morning of September 9, 2025, the doors to room HVC 210 inside the U.S. Capitol Visitor Center opened for a hearing with a title that left little ambiguity: Restoring Public Trust Through UAP Transparency and Whistleblower Protection. The event appeared on the official House Oversight Committee calendar under the authority of the Task Force on the Declassification of Federal Secrets. A live stream link was posted publicly on the committee's website. Press access was clearly defined. Guests were required to RSVP by noon the day before. Government identification was mandatory, and no last-minute substitutions were permitted. The invitation was public, the schedule precise, the mechanics strictly procedural. The agenda was released in advance. 4 witnesses were listed: 2 Air Force veterans, a police chief, and a journalist. There were no unexplained withdrawals and no substitutions. The hearing was open to both press and public. A C-SPAN camera was mounted at the rear of the room, facing the familiar rows of nameplates and microphones. The committee's stated purpose was clear. Members would hear testimony on concerns surrounding the disclosure of unidentified anomalous phenomena and examine transparency within federal agencies, with particular focus on the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. The work and effectiveness of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office would be examined openly. Representative Anna Paulina Luna, chairing the task force, placed her framing on the record before proceedings began. For too long, she said, the American people had been denied the truth about unidentified anomalous phenomena and the role the government played in collecting information about these encounters. She described the hearing as a critical step toward restoring public trust by demanding transparency and ensuring whistleblowers were protected from retaliation. Every stage of the process left a digital trail: the posted notice, RSVP instructions, witness list, and archived livestream. The hearing was not just public, but documented, indexed, and accessible. With a paper trail, anyone could follow. I really want to hear your take on this. When a hearing is transparent in scheduling and paperwork, but not in operational power, do you see that as progress or theater? Drop your opinion in the comments. We genuinely try to read as many as possible, and we especially appreciate thoughtful, constructive comments. The official record was constructed in real time. Each detail functioned as a safeguard against quiet revision. For anyone searching for signs of obstruction, the logistics offered none. The event proceeded on schedule in a room that had hosted countless oversight hearings before. On the surface, the process appeared clean. The language of the official notice left little room for ambiguity. Stamped with the authority of the House Task Force on the Declassification of Federal Secrets, the mission was laid out plainly. Members would hear testimony on ongoing concerns regarding the disclosure of unidentified anomalous phenomena, and would examine transparency issues involving the Department of Defense and the intelligence community. The notice promised an analysis of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, placing government openness at the center of the agenda. The hearing's title itself, repeated across press releases and schedules, did more than describe the event. It announced intent to rebuild confidence, to demand transparency, to safeguard those who came forward. Every phrase carried weight: restoring public trust, demanding transparency, ensuring whistleblower protection. These lines, drawn from Representative Luna's framing, echoed through the room before any witness took an oath. Her opening statement sharpened the stakes. She rejected science fiction framing and idle speculation.
But when Hubble found a cluster of
this, she said, was about national security, accountability, and the public's right to truth. She posed the question forward: would the country pursue truth with courage? She stated her intention clearly: to stand on the side of truth, transparency, and accountability. The rhetoric was more than aspirational. It functioned as a public contract. Transparency hung in the room like a promise. Yet as the hearing unfolded, tension surfaced. The stated mission was
Environ
trust and
un septième
openness,
de seconde
but the
après la
structure
transmission.
relied heavily on testimony rather than data. The witness bench was rich in experience and pressure, but thin on direct authority over raw data. No representatives from agencies controlling the most sensitive information were present. No sensor operators, no classified program managers. The promise was openness, yet the design kept the deepest data streams at a distance. The hearing was accessible, the language clear, and safeguards were visible, but the gap between stated purpose and operational depth was impossible to miss. The public could watch, listen, and read the record, but the central question lingered. Was this a window into secrecy or a stage with boundaries already drawn? The witness table was full, yet the most powerful voices in the UAP story were absent. Those who operate the nation's most advanced sensors remained off-stage. Individuals capable of pulling raw tracks from infrared satellites or cueing deep space radar systems were nowhere to be seen. No representatives from the National Reconnaissance Office appeared, no Space Force program managers, no officials from intelligence space surveillance networks. Names like SBIRS and Space Fence did not appear in the official record, despite defining how the United States detects objects in deep space and the upper atmosphere. These are not obscure systems. SBIRS monitors missile launches and anything burning hot against the black of space. The Space Fence, a billion-dollar radar array, tracks tens of thousands of objects, from satellites to debris to anomalies without known profiles. Both feed classified pipelines where secrecy is standard. On paper, AARO is meant to access all relevant data. In practice, authority over raw sensor release remains with originating agencies. That means the people best positioned to answer the hardest questions are structurally shielded from public scrutiny. Here's an expanded version that keeps the same tone, cadence, and analytical depth while widening the lens and deepening the argument. I've preserved the documentary-style rhythm and escalation you're using. The hearing leaned on testimony, not telemetry. Personal accounts filled the room, detailed and emotionally charged, but the custodians of space-based evidence remained silent. No one could ask why a specific infrared event had been categorized as routine. No one could question whether a radar system had tracked an object that accelerated, altered course, or disappeared without explanation. The tools capable of answering those questions were absent, and so were the people authorized to speak for them. The committee called for transparency, but the architecture of access kept the deepest layers of data firmly out of reach. The omission was not subtle. The most revealing systems operate behind walls of classification and compartmentalization. Their managers do not answer to public hearings. They answer to defense chains of command, intelligence authorities, and internal review boards that rarely intersect with open oversight. This was not a missing invitation or a scheduling oversight. It was a system doing exactly what it was designed to do, separating data ownership from public accountability. Even when transparency is the stated objective, final authority remains with those who control the sensors. The result is a hearing that can ask questions, express concern, and issue demands, but cannot compel the people holding the evidence to appear or comply. The question remains unresolved. What does transparency mean when the evidence holders are always somewhere else? Testimony filled the room, carefully worded and often sincere, but telemetry never crossed the table. Stories were told, timelines described, and motives debated. Yet the raw data, the kind that can be measured, replayed, and independently verified, remained locked behind classification barriers. No sensor logs were entered into the record. No radar tracks were displayed. No infrared heat signatures were shown. The committee heard narratives, not signals. Trust, once eroded, is difficult to rebuild with testimony alone. And this was not new. Past hearings followed the same pattern. Strong language about openness, followed by an absence of exhibits. There were no unredacted images, no authenticated chains of custody for physical materials, no primary source telemetry that could survive adversarial scrutiny. The most compelling evidence always seemed to exist just beyond reach. This was not a failure of oversight. It was the product of design. Custodial proof remains with agencies that were not present. Operators of advanced sensor systems are shielded by layers of secrecy that extend beyond congressional curiosity. Even offices tasked with analysis are often forced to summarize rather than show. Authority stays with the originators of the data, not the bodies tasked with restoring public confidence. The public is left with interpretations of what the data might reveal, not the data itself. In the world of oversight, testimony can persuade, but documents decide. Without access to original telemetry, verification remains impossible. Every claim exists at a remove, filtered through policy, clearance, and institutional caution. Polling reflects the cost of this distance. Surveys consistently show a belief that information is being withheld. The hearing promised restoration, but offered no measurable proof of progress. Transparency was discussed at length. yet remained abstract. The absence of custodial proof draws a sharp line between two models of disclosure. A window allows the public to see evidence directly, question it, and reach independent conclusions. A stage presents a narrative, carefully framed, selectively lit, and constrained by what is allowed to be shown. The structure left the central question unanswered. If trust is the goal, control still dominates the process. NASA's formal involvement began earlier, framed deliberately around science rather than speculation. Its independent study group emphasized rigor, data quality, and stigma-free reporting. The results were published, cautious in tone, and limited in scope. NASA called for better data, improved reporting standards, and coordination across agencies, but avoided classified terrain. A new research role was established. Data access was promised where legally and structurally possible. The posture was intentional, transparent, but
Environ
limited,
1/7 de seconde
scientific,
après la
but
transmission.
adjacent. The motive was never stated outright. NASA's brand depends on clean science and public credibility. When congressional hearings intensify and political temperature rises, NASA remains present but peripheral. Jurisdiction and classification define its distance from the most sensitive evidence. The sensors that matter most remain under defense control. NASA contributes analysis, not disclosure. As the conversation moves from near-Earth incidents to deep space detections, the flow of information narrows further. Timing becomes managed. Release schedules shape narrative. Raw data often exists early, sometimes immediately, but reaches the public later. Processed, contextualized, and framed. This cadence is not concealment, it is control of pace. For routine science, the system functions smoothly. For anomalies, timing itself becomes leverage. Discovery is public. High-resolution truth waits. Transparency shifts from outcome to process. Not what is shown, but how disclosure is described. Theories emerge to explain the pattern. Hearings proceed. Evidence does not. Testimony replaces telemetry. Custodians remain absent. The scope of disclosure narrows. As distance increases, atmospheric to orbital, orbital to interstellar. The wall thickens. Release lags grow longer. Language shifts from immediacy to procedure. Control persists. History supports the forecast. No classified sensor logs have entered the public record. The pattern repeats. Rapid notice, delayed detail, curated release. NASA's reputation acts as a shield, presence without exposure. Hearings function as pressure valves. Momentum builds, vents publicly, and then stabilizes. The system absorbs scrutiny without yielding its most sensitive assets. Transparency is performed, not delivered, and the question endures. Who decides what we are allowed to know? In this architecture, absence speaks louder than disclosure. So what would real openness actually look like? If you want more of these deep dives, make sure you're subscribed, leave a like, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what's next. It's free, it helps the channel a lot, and it's the simplest way to make sure future episodes don't slip past you. And if you know someone who obsessively follows this topic, sharing the video is basically